Honourable member for Strathmore Brooks.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when I wrote this speech, I was in a slightly more aggressive mood than I am today, but I'll do my best to address the budget in the light in which I had originally written my remarks. Today, I rise to speak to Bill 9, which allows me yet another enjoyable chance to speak against the budget. Every time, everything I have to say about this budget has pretty much already been said in this chamber before. Most of the points I'm about to make have been made by myself, by my colleagues, and by Albertans in every possible forum. I've received phone calls, emails, snail mail telling me that this budget will destroy the Alberta advantage. I've had town hall meetings in Brooks, in Bazzano, and in Strathmore, where constituents have told me that this will hurt their businesses and their livelihoods. At these town halls, my constituents have told me to fight this budget at every turn. This government has gone out of its way to make people forget about what we used to call the Alberta advantage. We have discussed at length how this government has a chronic spending problem, a problem that existed long before they were elected. But while previous governments had a spending problem, this government has elevated it to a spending crisis, a crisis of such a magnitude that spending at debt levels in this budget are not even legal under the current budgetary framework. That is why the government is also proposing Bill 4, allowing not just consolidated deficits to be financed with debt, but now even structural operational deficits to be financed with debt. It attacks the last line of defense that Alberta has had against spendthrift politicians. That line of defense was established long ago to protect Albertans from politicians that lack restraint. Over the last decade, successive governments have watered down and weakened those walls of fiscal defense every time they have run into them. It took the NDP just 5 months to propose tearing down yet another wall. Bill 4 will allow this government to pass this budget, allowing them to take on more than $50 billion of debt. I'll give this much to the NDP. At least they are not trying to hide their intentions. They didn't wait until years 3 or 4 to raise the debt ceiling after 3 or 4 years of pretending that they would even balance the budget. No. They are proposing to break the bank in their very first year. This budget expects to run at least 4 consecutive cumulative deficits. That is, under the best-case scenario, with predictions for years 4 and 5, that we will see an incredible 16% growth in revenues those years. As we wander out of the 12 years in the deficit desert, the Minister of Finance believes that he can part the sea and lead us to the promised land of oil and honey. If I was doing the books for a business in Brooks, would they renew my contract if I told them that they would see a 16% growth in revenues years 4 and 5 out with zero data to back it up? During the estimates process, I asked the Minister of Finance to give us his numbers for years 4 and 5 of the budget. I asked him repeatedly, and he provided us with nothing more than the ministry's talking points. When pressed into a corner, the minister flat out refused to provide the data. I asked for these numbers in this House repeatedly. I asked that the numbers be tabled in this House. I asked that the numbers be given to us in estimates. Nothing. They say that this is a 3-year budget. Fine. We can deal with that. But if this is a 3-year budget, then they should take years 4 and 5 out. Remove the 2 outlying years that project a balanced budget without a shred of data whatsoever detailing how they actually intend to get there. Otherwise, this is not a 3-year budget. It is a 5-year budget that doesn't do its homework. Either the crystal ball predictions for the next 4 and 5 years need to be removed from the budget, or the revenue and spending breakdowns must be provided. You can't have your cake and 82, Madam Speaker. The government can't give these highly unlikely but very good for publicity numbers and not tell us how they plan to actually achieve them. This budget does not deserve to be passed without full details. But since I've asked the minister dozens of times and not gotten any answers, I'll have to take my best guess about where the money's going to come from. On Sunday morning, while most Albertans were at church or watching football or taking the kids to brunch, the Premier announced her new NDPST, a massive new $3 billion carbon tax that will hammer every single small business and family in Alberta. During the election, the Premier promised Albertans that she would never implement a PST, but this carbon tax is the equivalent of a 3% PST. In June, the NDP brought down the biggest single tax increase in the history of Alberta. Just a few months later, they beat that record again. The NDPST is how the government plans to part the red ink sea. More taxes on Albertans who are already struggling. During estimates, I asked the Minister of Finance if he had any further plans to raise taxes. He said no, not unless the economy took a further severe downturn. Yet, here they are, raising taxes just a few weeks later. I'd be fascinated to see a single piece of economic literature that says that during times of economic downturns, that governments should increase taxes as a way to fix the economy. I must admit, I have a hard time finding any economic theory to back that up. The only example I can find is what the NDP are doing to Alberta right now. While the big five oil companies might be happy to pay a carbon tax, it would be devastating to the hundreds of medium and small-sized oil producers and drillers like those in my constituency. It will hammer Alberta taxpayers and Alberta families and Alberta small businesses when they can least afford it. It's kicking people when they're down, Madam Speaker. But while the Premier promised during the election, till she was blue in the face, that she would never impose a PST, and she never once spoke during the campaign saying that she would implement a carbon tax. But that is exactly what they're doing right now. Madam Speaker, this government has no mandate for an NDPST carbon tax. A $3 billion backdoor PST would be bad enough on its own, but it's not. This budget raises taxes and taxes some more. In fact, raises over 60 new or higher taxes, not including the tax on everything that we've just learned about. This budget is reckless not just for its wanton tax hikes, but it is reckless also because the numbers don't even add up. A few weeks ago, the Parliamentary Budget Officer released a report detailing their predictions for WTI oil prices over the next 5 years. As far as reputable, reliable, and respected sources go, the PBO is all of the above. Their numbers were a little different than the government of Alberta's. By a little, I mean a hell of a lot. In fact, the numbers were so different that it opens up an $8 billion hole in the revenues of this province for the next 3 years alone. I want to know how the government managed to book a difference per year of $11.60 per barrel compared to the PBO's projections. The NDP cannot have a multi-billion-dollar rounding error every 6 months. Every $3 change in the price of oil is a $500 million change in revenues for the government. This is not a small rounding error. A $2 billion hole per calendar year is not acceptable. Before the budget is passed, it must be amended with realistic oil projections. In 2018, the PBO projects oil to be $53.80 per barrel. This government projects 72 cents. It doesn't even come close. It is nearly 50% higher than the PBO's projections. It's not even in the same ballpark, Madam Speaker. Additionally, we don't even have projections for years 4 and 5 oil projections in this budget whatsoever. The PBO projects oil to be at $59 in 2020, which, by the way, is the price the NDP projects it will be next year. The PBO projects $59 in 2020, but the NDP don't even show their numbers for that year. All the minister could tell me in estimates was that it would be in the, quote, mid-70s range. Yet, the NDP project their revenues to increase by 16% in those 2 years. The Premier's claim that the NDPST will be revenue neutral should be judged with some obvious suspicion by the Albertans who will pay for it. Oil predictions are through the roof. Taxes are through the roof. The breakdown for revenue numbers in years 4 and 5 simply doesn't exist. Just the other week, I made a friendly bet with the member for Calgary-Curry that without tax hikes, unbudgeted in the NDP's platform, that this budget would not meet its revenue projections of a balanced budget in the next election. Well, I thank the Premier and the Finance Minister for making me the easiest $100 I've ever made in my life. When we are standing in this place in a few months for the next budget, I'm sure that the Minister of Finance will have all sorts of excuses for why his optimistic numbers never came to fruition. But we don't have to wait a few months to fix the mistakes we're making right now. We don't have to wait 4 months for the Minister to say, "Oops, I didn't see it coming." It's as clear as day, and every member on this side of the House sees it coming. Let's do the responsible thing with this budget for Albertans and send it back to the shredder.